Welcome back. This is Mrs. Stiles, and I will be helping you with lesson 10 today. It is related to yesterday's lesson in that when we were adding, we realized that you only ever add things that are alike. Well, it's the same with subtracting. You can only subtract things that are alike. You can only take peanuts from peanuts, or balls from balls, or tenths from tenths, or hundreds from hundreds. Okay, so that's why we line up the decimal point when we add and subtract, because you can only add or subtract common units. Okay, so if we jump into our problem set, the first problem is all in unit form to get you to realize that concept. Notice in part A, it says 5/10 minus 2/10 would be 3/10. 5 minus 2 is 3. If we write that in standard form, it would be 0.3. Okay, 5 ones, 9 thousandths, minus 2 ones. Well, notice we subtract the common units. The ones, 5 ones minus 2 ones would be 3 ones, and I still have those 9 thousandths. So if I write that in standard form, 3 goes in the ones place, 9 goes in the thousandths place, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. Okay, just a side note, if you were looking at this written using the standard algorithm, 5 ones, 9 thousandths. If you were supposed to subtract 2 ones, you would not put the 2 down here. You would put the 2 in the ones place. It would go right here. So you're subtracting the ones from the ones. You would have 3 ones left, and you would still have those 9 thousandths. And we're going to work on that later in the lesson. Okay, but continuing with unit form, we have 7 hundredths, 8 hundredths, minus 4 hundredths. Okay, so we're going to subtract the hundredths. I would still have the 7 hundredths, but when I do my subtraction of hundredths, I would be left with 4 hundredths. So my answer, 7 hundredths, 4 hundredths. So 7 in the hundreds place, 4 in the hundredths place. Okay, and the last one in unit form, it says 37 thousandths minus 16 thousandths. There's a common unit here, so we just do our subtraction. 37 minus 16 would be 21 thousandths. And if I want to write 21 thousandths in standard form, remember we have tenths, hundredths, thousandths. If my answer needs to end in thousandths, here's the 21. So I see that I need to put the 0 in the tenths place. Okay, so that was concentrating on unit form and that you only subtract things that are alike. So now let's look down here. This is where we just solve using the standard algorithm, which is like this, where we line up our numbers. Okay, so if you notice in this first one, if I write it vertically, notice I line up the decimal point because it lines up my digits in the right places. The tenths are lined up with tenths and the ones are lined up with ones. And then we do our subtraction. Now again, you can't do 4 minus 7, so we subtract, or we borrow from the 1, which leaves me with nothing, and it makes this a 14, because I add 10 to this number. 14 minus 7 is 7, 0 minus 0 is 0. So my answer is 7/10. Okay, I would suggest you pause the video and do the rest of this page by yourself, and then log on to check your answers. And then we'll look at the back. There's a couple tricky things on subtracting on the back, but you should be able to do these okay. So I would pause, do these, and then come back and you can check your answers. Okay, I'm gonna work through these myself quickly. So that way, if you pause and come back, you're not sitting there listening to a really long explanation and you just want to check your numbers. Notice there's nothing here, so I'm going to put a 0, and then I do my subtraction. Okay. And you can put your answers up in the blanks, but I'm just, for time's sake, I'm just going to keep trekking. Subtract. Again, they like to borrow 4 minus 7 a lot in this, seems like. Okay. Again, there's nothing in this thousandths place, so I'm going to put a 0 there, just so I have something in every spot. 14 minus 7 again. Okay. Notice this one. It becomes important to add a digit here because we're going to have to borrow. I can't do 0 minus 6, so I have to come over here. This one you had to put a 0 on. Can't do 0 minus 5, so again I have to borrow. Can't do 0 minus 2. Okay, so really look at that one and make sure you got it right. That one was harder. And this last one, again, it looks like we're going to have to add a 0 up here before we can proceed. We can't do 0 minus 1. So I'm going to make this a 0 because I borrowed. Make this a 10. 10 minus 1 is 9. Then I come here in this column. I can't do 0 minus 4. So I borrow 1 from the 3 and make it a 2, which makes that a 10. 10 minus 4 is 6. Come here, I cannot do 2 minus 8. So I borrow from the 1, make it a 0, make him a 12. 12 minus 8 is 4. A lot of borrowing in this one. Can't do 0 minus 2. So I borrow from the 6, make it a 5, make that a 10. 10 minus 2 is 8. Okay, so again, really check that one. Make sure you got it right. Okay, so in these two, it was super important to put that 0 here and not just drop the 6 down, which a lot of kids will want to do. Notice, because this isn't a 6. This became a 10 minus 6, which is 4. Okay, let's flip to the back. Notice on these that the problem is given in unit form, but then we need to write them in standard form and use the standard algorithm to subtract. Okay, so what I mean by that is 10 tens would be 100. 110, 1/10. Well, 110 would be 10. Notice how I'm lining it up. 1/10 would be here. Okay, notice that I lined up the ones place and the tens place. Now to do subtraction, I have to have a digit right here. So I'm going to make this be 100 decimal 0, okay, to do my subtraction. Okay, so you really, really have to be careful. Okay, now I'm going to have to do a lot of borrowing because I can't do this. Nothing here, nothing here. Borrow from the 1, make this a 0, which makes this 10, but I have to borrow from it. So I make it a 9, which makes this 0 a 10. But I have to borrow from it. So I make it a 9, and it finally makes this one a 10. And now we can do our subtraction. So it'd be 9, 9, 8. Okay, let's go to this one. We have 3 whole minus 22 tenths. Remember, 22 tenths is 2.2, if you remember that. Okay, 22, if it has to end in the tenths place, here's the tenths place, the decimal goes between the 2's. Okay, so 3 whole, I'm gonna write that. 22 tenths, if it's 2.2, this 2 is in the ones place. So notice how I lined those up. The 3 is in the ones place, the 2 is in the ones place. So I'm gonna make this become 3.0. And now I can do my subtraction. Again, I have to borrow. So my answer becomes 8/10. Okay, next one. 37/10. Okay, 37/10. If it's going to end in the tenths place, that means I need one number after the decimal point. So I'm going to put the decimal point right here for 37/10. Okay, then I have 1. That means I have a 1 in the ones place and a 2 in the tenths place. So once you write the problem down, that one's pretty easy. 2 5/10. Okay, next one. We have 8 ones 9/100. Okay, so an 8 in the ones place, a 9 in the hundredths place, minus 3 4/10. Okay, good. And I'm just going to fill in a 0 here, so every place has a digit. And then we do our subtraction, 9 minus 0. I can't do 0 minus 4, so I borrow from the 8 and make it a 7. It becomes a 10. 10 minus 4, 6. And I got my answer. Okay, you might try the last two and then see if you get them. Okay, but I'll keep going. We have 5 622 thousandths minus 3 hundredths. That means I have a 3 in the hundredths place. Tenths, hundredths. There's my 3 in the hundredths place. Okay, again, we can fill in our empty spots with zeros. And then when I do my subtraction, 2 minus 0 is 2. I cannot do 2 minus 3, so I have to borrow. 12 minus 3 is 9. 5 and 5. Okay, and then the last one up here, we have 2 ones, so a 2 in the ones place, and 4 tenths. Minus 59 hundredths. Again, I'm going to fill in my empty spot with a 0. And then realize I cannot do 0 minus 9. So I have to borrow from the 4, make it a 3, makes this a 10. 10 minus 9 is 1. And I come to the tenths place. I cannot do 3 minus 5. So I borrow from the 2, make it a 1. Makes this a 13. 13 minus 5 is 8. And then I have a 1. Okay, so now we're just down to 2 word problems. So let's take a look. Mrs. Fan wrote 5 tenths minus 3 hundredths on the board. Michael said the answer is 2 tenths because 5 minus 3 is 2. Is he correct? Explain. Well, think about that for a second. He just looked and said, 5 minus 3. What's the problem with that? The units are different, okay? You cannot subtract things with different units. So is he correct? No, because you cannot subtract different units. Okay, if you were looking at that, it would be 5 tenths is right here. 3 hundredths would be like that. Okay, so when you subtract, if you were going to show that problem, the answer would be 47 hundredths, not 2 tenths. Okay, and the last problem. Now you got to really pay attention to this one. Okay, it says a pen costs $2.09. It costs 45 cents less than a marker. So let's think about that for a second. How much would the marker cost? The marker costs more, right? The pen costs $2.09, and that was 45 cents less than a marker. So that means a marker costs 45 cents more than a pen. Okay, so if the marker costs more, to get the marker, I have to add. Okay, so the marker, we would take the $2.09 and add the 45 cents. and realize that the marker costs $2.54. Okay, so I'm going to keep reading then. Ken paid for 1 pen and 1 marker with a $5 bill. Use a tape diagram with calculations to determine his change. Okay, so there's different ways that you could show this on a tape diagram. You could you could make your tape be the total amount of money that he had if you wanted. And so there's different ways to do this. This is how I might think about it. If I think about this tape represents his total money. So if I think about his total money being $5, and part of his money he paid for a pen, which is $2.09. And part of his money he paid for a marker, which is $2.54. And then what's left over, that's what I'm looking for, that's his change, but it all adds up to $5. Okay, well, how would we figure out what his change was? Well, the best thing to do is figure out what his total was. What did the pen and the marker cost together? So $2.09 plus $2.54. Let's see what that would be. Okay, so his total cost was $4.63. So the clerk at the store says, you owe me $4.63. And he hands her a $5 bill. So what's his change? We would subtract from a $5 bill. So $5, take away $4.63. Okay, we're gonna have to borrow this a 4, make this a 10, but I gotta borrow from it, so let's make it a 9, which makes this a 10. So 10 minus 3, 7, 3, and it looks like his change is 37 cents. So Ken gets 37 cents in change. Okay, there we go. That was lesson 10, so now you can move on to your homework. Good luck, and we hope to see you back soon.